بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد الحبيب. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, it gives me great pleasure to be with you and celebrate the 10th year anniversary of the Nagoya Protocol on the ABS. As happy as we may be that 10 years have passed and quite big strides have been achieved, such as the mapping of the traditional knowledge or even the national strategy on the conservation of crop wild relatives. I would like to emphasize that we are still just at the beginning. We need to keep the momentum going and to be ever more vigilant, since after the COVID-19 pandemic, the global dynamics have changed. This can be seen in the realm of legal frameworks, services and logistics, but above all on the ethical level, such that unfortunately illegal exploitation of the world's natural resources have become ever more rampant. This comes at a huge cost, which no one can afford, and I'm not talking purely on economic or monetary costs, but rather the result of the collapse of our ecosystem services, and with a consequence of unimaginable magnitude. Thus, as global citizens, it is our duty to prioritize our efforts in ensuring the continuation of ABS and translate it into actions on the ground. Here, I would like to draw on my religion, Islam, where it says that we are the stewards of the earth. And as the custodians, it is not for us to use and abuse the natural resources, but rather we are the keepers of it for the next generations. To conclude, I would like to take this opportunity to highlight how His Majesty King Abdullah II took the lead by drafting the Global Charter for recognizing the rights of fauna and flora and ecosystems, which complement the international efforts on their conservation, but has taken it to the next level up. We all need to genuinely commit ourselves for the next phase of the ABS Global Project by building on our past successes, which the UN had an instrumental role in getting us to where we are today, as well as the generous contribution from GEF. I would also like to celebrate with you today the Blessed Prophet Muhammad ﷺ's birthday as it is today, and wish you all a very successful conference and a good way forward to the future. Thank you so much.
Madagascar has actively participated in the preliminary and final negotiation for the adoption of the Nagoya Protocol at the global level. Then, the government has sent the protocol in 2011, so shortly after its adoption by the parties of the CBD. I would like to say that steps have been taken during the past 10 years, but much remains to be done at national and international levels. I hope that our common effort will bear fruit so that the Nagoya Protocol on ABS becomes a real lever for the effective sustainable management of biodiversity. I'm happy to participate in the celebration of the 10th anniversary of the Nagoya Protocol, which I hope will have soon tangible and real socioeconomic and environmental impacts for human well-being. Thank you very much.
Welcome, colleagues, to this second session of the Global ABS Conference 2020, the ABS we all need. The idea with this session is to start a dialogue between governments, national competent authorities, and researchers. And the idea is to initiate this dialogue, to exchange experience, and to learn from each other in order to continue the dialogue for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Let me give you some logistic arrangements for this session. This session is being recorded and will be available through the global ABS community, the community of practice of the UNDP-GEF global ABS project. During this session, participants' microphones will be muted, but you will be able to ask your questions through the Q&A functionality available at the toolbar located at the bottom of your screen. Participants' questions will be addressed after the panelists' presentations during the Q&A section at the end of the session. To continue discussions on the topics of this webinar, please visit the Global ABS community and leave your discussion on the forum section. Very importantly, this webinar has the option for simultaneous interpretation. Please make sure to select the language excuse me, of your preference at the right bottom of your Zoom toolbar. This meeting is having interpretation into French and also in Arabic. It's very important that all of us speak slowly in order to allow the interpreters to perform their work, okay? So, moving on to this session, I would like to explain that, first of all, I would like to thank Her Royal Highness Princess Basma bin Ali and the National Focal Point from Madagascar, who is with us as panelists today, for their inspiring messages. This global conference had been planned to take place physically in Jordan. So due to the current crisis with the pandemic, unfortunately, we have to organize this conference online, okay? Well, making the general introduction, my name is Alejandro Lago. I'm the manager of the UNDP-GEF Global ABS project, the project is co-organizing the conference with the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity, and also in collaboration with the governments of Japan and Jordan. Last Thursday, October 29th, marked the 10th anniversary of the adoption of the Nagoya Protocol, a perfect excuse to celebrate this instrument, take stock of the progress made in the last years of implementation, but more importantly, to identify the issues that need to be addressed and need to be adjusted, and take advantage of the unique opportunity that the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework negotiations brings to all of us. In that sense, today, with this session, we initiate the substantive part of the Global ABS Conference with the first out of 3 dialogues that we have prepared between governments and researchers. The following Wednesdays, we will have a dialogue with private sector and a dialogue with indigenous peoples and local communities. We believe the mobilization of researchers into ABS is so crucial that we have decided to approach this session for researchers through regional sessions. The idea is not to go in depth and find the solution to all the issues. I wish we could have a magical wand to do that, but to initiate a dialogue on these important matters, a dialogue between governments and researchers that should continue at the appropriate national and regional levels in preparation for the post-2020 biodiversity negotiations. We have a long list of panelists, and therefore I take this opportunity to insist on the importance of making short interventions, speak slowly as we have interpretation, and keep as much as possible according to the plan in order to properly hear from each other and also have some time towards the end for some questions and answers and some debate. I will start applying that concrete approach with a very short introduction of each speaker, referring only to the current position of each panelist, but we would like to invite you all, the attendees, to check their short bios of the panelists in the website of the conference. We will hear from two ABS experiences from the region, and then from other colleagues on ABS emerging issues or issues that need our attention. But before giving them the floor, I would like to hear from Mr. Taukondo Senshi-Kongo, who is the ABS Senior Program Manager at the Convention on Biological Diversity, who is going to make a short presentation of the ABS system under the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Nagoya Protocol. Mr. Shikongo is very experienced on ABS and international negotiations, as he served as Africa's chief negotiator for the negotiations of the Nagoya Protocol in 2010. And he was actually the co-chair of the small group on compliance. Taukondo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alejandro, and good afternoon to everybody. My task this morning this afternoon is to give a very brief overview on the ABS system for users and providers. And as you can see, we are comparing it to a soccer team and saying that when the soccer team works together, then everything will work together to give us the ABS we all need. There are what the users need, there are what the providers need. Can we have the next slide? And so if we all work together as a team and we all know the rules of the game, then the Nagoya Protocol provides a framework to help countries address the concerns of all, and through that, then give us the ABS in which we all work together. May I have the next slide, which will be a short movie that will give us an indication of how the ABS system works. It's developed with the ABS initiative and provides that overview of the interaction between the main actors involved in ABS in the Nagoya Protocol system. And you can find it also on YouTube in all 5 languages.
Many products in food, cosmetics, biotech, and medicines, as well as advances in science, are based on genetic resources. Already in 1992, the CBD had established access and benefit sharing principles, which includes the obligation for users of genetic resources to share benefits with providers of those resources. However, one challenge remained: to ensure benefit sharing once the user has left the provider country with the genetic resource. There was no international system that allowed the provider to keep track of what was happening with their resource abroad. With the Nagoya Protocol, which entered into force in 2014, this changed. The ABS Clearinghouse was established as the central hub to facilitate the necessary communication and information exchange between users, providers, and governments. The ABS Clearinghouse facilitates the monitoring of the utilization of a genetic resource once it leaves the provider country. The Nagoya Protocol sets up a system to inform the provider country on milestones related to the utilization of genetic resources abroad. However, to make this system work, every country needs to take action at the national level. Therefore, a country must establish at least one competent national authority, or CNA for short. The CNA issues a permit to grant access to genetic resources in accordance with domestic regulations. Key information from the permit must be transferred to the ABS Clearinghouse. The submitted information now constitutes the internationally recognized Certificate of Compliance. Now, let's turn our attention to a user. After possibly many years of laboratory work, she has succeeded in research and development and now puts a product on the market. With her certificate and the required documentation, she goes to the authority for market approval in her country. This authority, since it has been designated to act as checkpoint in the ABS process, sends a message called a checkpoint communique to the ABS Clearinghouse. The ABS Clearinghouse, having received the checkpoint communique, automatically informs the CNA in the provider country. This allows the competent national authority to compare the communique with the initial permit, domestic legislation, and with the contract documents. Action can now be taken by the CNA if the utilization was not in accordance with the initial agreement. Certainty for all parties is ensured through this process, no matter how much time has passed. Let's take a closer look at the key elements of this global system for monitoring the utilization of genetic resources. The CNA in a country is responsible for issuing a permit when access requirements are met and benefit sharing is agreed. When the information from the permit issued by the CNA is registered on the ABS Clearinghouse, it becomes the internationally recognized Certificate of Compliance, the central document to ensure legal certainty in the user country. The ABS Clearinghouse facilitates the exchange and flow of information with respect to the utilization of genetic resources. Furthermore, countries that have ratified the Nagoya Protocol are obliged to share information on their national ABS procedures in the ABS Clearinghouse. This information helps users to understand the particular ABS requirements of a given country. Checkpoints gather information from users on when and how genetic resources are being utilized in order to report back to the ABS Clearinghouse and thus inform the provider. Typical checkpoints are patent offices, funding institutions, publishers, market approval authorities, and other institutions dealing with innovation, product development, and commercialization. The checkpoint communique is a standard form for compiling the information gathered by the checkpoint in order to make it available to the ABS Clearinghouse and forward it to the provider. All countries have to put all these elements in place. Only when these elements are operating effectively will monitoring the use of genetic resources between countries be possible. This will contribute to increasing transparency and trust and result in more ABS agreements and partnerships, which in turn translate into advances in science, more innovation, products, and benefit sharing for users, providers, and the conservation of nature.
So that's the ABS system, and it is to ensure access to resources and benefit sharing. And the goal of that is that benefits can support conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. In the protocol, next slide, there is Article 8, which is on special consideration by parties. And this is done because, like in any event in real life, you can have your soccer match when it is snowing or raining or people having fun. And then the rules, therefore, may have to be adjusted a little bit to account for that. So Article 8 brings in consideration, especially to expedite access and encourage non-commercial research, to handle sharing of pathogens and health emergencies through expedited access and expedited benefit sharing, including affordable treatment, as well as to address issues of food security. Now, any system that we have may have issues that leads to complaint. Next slide. And one has to consider what are the most common complaints from users of genetic resources. Next slide. The most common complaints is around from users, how can I legally access a genetic resource? How can I get my ball into the net? And these common complaints is addressed by us providing the information if it's not available, or the national focal point not responding to a request, or procedures for access that are not clear. So the Secretariat runs a help desk that can help users of ABS to use its functionality or answer questions related to the implementation of the protocol by email. And most visitors to the Clearinghouse are users, which comprise 60% of the people that visits the mechanism. And the Clearinghouse mechanism is about communication and information sharing. ABS is the official, Clearinghouse is the official place to communicate and share information about the system, how it works, the challenges experienced, etc. And unofficial communication and cooperation also plays a big role for ABS to achieve what it's supposed to achieve. And users can help improve the Clearinghouse mechanism by providing feedback to the Secretariat as to how they have had the experience of dealing with the system. Next slide. Now, through looking at that system, one can then see what are the ABS procedures, and these procedures are step-by-step guides, guidelines that the countries can share on the Clearinghouse mechanism to help guide users through the various rules and procedures for access. Countries can specify different procedures based on different types of use, types of genetic resource, types of users, as well as provide answers on to whom do I submit my application, how long will it take, what are the prerequisites, what documents are needed, and is there a fee? Next slide. And as we have heard in the short movie, there is the issue of the internationally recognized certificate of compliance. It serves mainly two purposes, which is it serves as evidence of compliance as users encounter checkpoints along the road that the genetic resource is taking, and it's to facilitate information on utilization is shared with the provider without giving away any confidential information. And so the final slide brings us to when it comes to ABS, where all are on the same team, the procedures are clear, the rules are clear, the players have legal certainty, and it's a transparent system, then we can all achieve the ABS that we want. And so today we are here to discuss together as Team Nagoya Protocol. Thank you. Over to Alejandro.
Thank you so much, Kondo. Thank you for setting the scene on ABS and the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Nagoya Protocol, how this system is established in these two instruments. And we would like to move to hear from experiences at the national level. And in this case, we have colleagues from Jordan and also colleagues from Madagascar. In this case, we wanted to have the competent national authority explaining what is the status, the situation of the ABS system, and the approach to research that they are taking, and also the experience from researchers in the country regarding the implementation of the ABS procedures, if they are in place, okay, or all the challenges that they may encounter. I am receiving some comments from colleagues, and that's why I was a bit distracted regarding the access to the Arabic channel. Apparently, some colleagues in the interpretation button, they don't have, they have only access to English and French, but they cannot see the Arabic channel. We are having Arabic interpretation. I don't know if this is an issue of the Zoom version that is available there, but I hope we can receive some indications on the kind of problem and fix it. I will like to start hearing from the colleagues from Madagascar to see if we manage to solve that problem, as we are having no problem with the interpretation. From Madagascar, we have with us today Ms. Lolona Ramamongisoa as the ABS National Focal Point in Madagascar from the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development. She is also Associate Professor at the Graduate School of Agronomy of the University of Antananarivo. Lolona, can you tell us what is the status of ABS in Madagascar, megadiverse, rich, megadiverse country with great potential for access and benefit sharing? Lolona, you have the floor.
Merci Alessandro. Je suis très heureuse de participer à cet événement qui entre dans le cadre de la célébration du 10e anniversaire du protocole de Nagoya. Donc, comme vous voyez sur le diapo, donc, Madagascar, c'est une grande île qui se trouve dans l'océan Indien, à l'est de l'Afrique. Prochaine diapo, s'il vous plaît. Alors, Madagascar et le protocole de Nagoya sur la paix, c'est que c'est déjà une histoire assez longue parce que dès son adoption, donc en 2010, Madagascar a effectué tout de suite donc, la signature en septembre 2011, puis l'a ratifiée en juillet 2014. Et dès lors, on a commencé donc les activités d'information et de sensibilisation pour toucher les différentes parties prenantes depuis l'année 2015. Et on a travaillé également sur la mise en place donc, du dispositif national, entre autres donc, la réglementation. Et on était arrivé donc à élaborer notre réglementation nationale en 2017. Conformément à ce que dit Alessandro tout à l'heure sur la richesse biologique dont dispose Madagascar, le champ d'application donc du protocole de Nagoya, selon notre réglementation nationale, touche toutes les ressources génétiques, que ce soit des ressources introduites ou des ressources omiques, bien entendu, exception donc des ressources des espèces qui sont dans l'annexe du TIRPA et à l'exception également des ressources génétiques d'origine humaine. Et le champ d'application également l'utilisation concernée par la réglementation nationale qui porte sur la recherche et développement, qui porte sur la composition génétique et biologique des ressources génétiques. Donc, en bref, à partir du moment où la ressource génétique de Madagascar entre dans un labo quelconque, il s'agit donc de la procédure APA à considérer. La réglementation présente également donc, le cadre institutionnel, notamment donc, la définition de l'autorité nationale compétente et la commission ad hoc intersectorielle, donc interministérielle, comme les ressources génétiques concernées donc, par cette réglementation ne sont pas seulement de la biodiversité sauvage, parce qu'il y a également d'autres ressources génétiques, les micro-organismes, entre autres, les ressources génétiques agricoles, etc. En bref, la modalité d'accès est soumise au principe de consentement préalable en connaissance de cause. Et ça doit être donc acquis auprès des différentes parties prenantes locales, notamment concernées par la ressource, des communautés comme de l'administration locale, comme des propriétaires fonciers, etc., etc. La réglementation distingue les deux types de recherche. Recherche à but non commercial, donc les recherches purement académiques, et les recherches à but commercial. Et pour les recherches à but commercial, donc, il y a nécessité d'élaborer le contrat à part ou les conditions convenues d'un commun accord entre les utilisateurs extérieurs. Et il est également requis à ces utilisateurs extérieurs de disposer d'une convention de collaboration avec une institution nationale publique de recherche. Et ça m'amène au deuxième diapo, s'il vous plaît. Alors, du côté des chercheurs et de la recherche, nous, donc, à Madagascar, on considère vraiment que ce sont des parties prenantes prioritaires dans le mécanisme APA. Donc, les chercheurs tiennent une place importante, un rôle important à jouer pour la mise en œuvre du mécanisme APA. Ils sont donc des groupes cibles dans les activités de sensibilisation et de renforcement de capacité qu'on a commencé depuis 2015, comme j'ai dit tout à l'heure. Et premièrement, ce qu'on demande donc de nos chercheurs, c'est de mobiliser leurs capacités pour valoriser les ressources génétiques et développer du partenariat avec le secteur privé national. Donc, il y a vraiment une sensibilisation pour que les chercheurs s'activent donc dans le domaine de recherche et développement sur les ressources génétiques pour qu'on puisse avoir donc des valeurs ajoutées avec ces ressources et procéder à l'exportation après à la commercialisation en général. Parce que la plupart du temps, donc, on exporte beaucoup plus de matières premières et c'est un peu donc dommage pour le pays alors qu'on a des potentialités nationales. Les chercheurs ou les institutions de recherche à Madagascar ont beaucoup de réseaux de partenariats avec les sociétés extérieures utilisatrices de ressources génétiques de Madagascar. Il y a les firmes multinationales, notamment en Europe, donc, et puis il y a également donc, les labos de par le monde qui travaillent avec nos institutions de recherche. Les chercheurs sont donc sensibilisés également pour assurer un meilleur suivi des activités de recherche et l'exploitation des résultats et des produits. Il ne faut pas seulement donc se contenter dorénavant de faire la convention de collaboration, d'envoyer, d'expédier les échantillons à l'extérieur et puis on attend seulement. Mais il faut donc assurer ce suivi de l'utilisation des ressources génétiques à l'extérieur et puis veiller à l'issue des résultats de recherche, donc notamment sur la propriété intellectuelle ou le brevet, parce que malheureusement, il y a beaucoup de cas à Madagascar qui se sont apparus comme quoi il y a eu une ressource génétique de Madagascar qui a été utilisée à l'extérieur par le biais donc d'une coopération avec une institution nationale de recherche. Et après, on n'a pas eu d'informations et puis c'est le brevet publié seulement sans aucun impact sur l'institution nationale de recherche et sur Madagascar en général qui a eu lieu. Voilà pour ma part, pour vous donner un peu un aperçu du cadre national sur la mise en œuvre du protocole de Nagoya et sur nos préoccupations particulières donc, par rapport aux chercheurs. Je vais maintenant donner la parole à ma collègue, donc Claudine Ramiarson, qui est chercheur. Merci.
Thank you very much, Lolona, for this introduction to the ABS system in Madagascar.
Okay. Je vous remercie. Bonjour à tous et bon anniversaire également pour ces 10 ans de pratique, si on peut dire comme ça, de protocole de Nagoya et sa mise en œuvre au niveau national. Pour ma part, je vais vous parler de quelques expériences dans le cadre de la coordination de la recherche à Madagascar au cours de ces dernières années, de pratiques sur les ressources génétiques où on a bien vu un regain d'intérêt, un engouement pour les plantes médicinales, les plantes cosmétiques plus particulièrement, mais aussi les plantes alimentaires. Cela au sein des universités, au sein des centres nationaux de recherche. J'aimerais souligner ainsi quelques points qui nous semblent être pertinents pour répondre à la question qui nous est posée, à savoir les apports de la recherche, les défis pour combler les lacunes entre la mise en œuvre actuelle de l'APA et l'APA dont nous avons tous besoin. Premièrement, comme vous le voyez plus haut, le protocole de Nagoya sur l'accès et le partage des avantages bouleverse certainement les pratiques de recherche. D'une part, avec ces nouveaux concepts, pour beaucoup de chercheurs, de nos chercheurs dans nos pays, qui impliquent la considération des connaissances traditionnelles et de leurs détenteurs, des communautés locales. D'autre part également, en termes de procédures, il y a des autorisations de recherche, d'accès, de collecte, les conventions rendues indispensables entre les parties prenantes. Ainsi, les conventions avec les institutions étrangères, comme disait la point focale tout à l'heure, étaient très ouvertes, moins précises auparavant. Maintenant, on demande de respecter les principes de l'APA. Il faut des clauses, type de contrat. Ça devrait être une des mesures d'accompagnement des textes qu'on a élaborés à Madagascar. Clauses, type de contrat, mise à jour de certains contrats et de conventions, des accords cadres devront être ainsi élaborés. Concernant donc les dispositions, considérant les dispositions sur les modalités d'accès, considérant également les annexes du protocole de Nagoya, qui sont repris dans le décret APA malgache, qui propose entre autres une liste des avantages monétaires et non monétaires. Je citerai par exemple le partage des résultats de recherche, les renforcements de capacité, le transfert de technologie, la copropriété, etc. D'ailleurs, dans le décret APA malgache, dans son article 24, on incite beaucoup à cette coopération. Je pense que la pointe focale en a parlé tout à l'heure. La coopération entre institutions de recherche nationales et étrangères. Dans ces contrats, désormais, on doit y voir une contribution à la recherche et développement. Le décret APA de Madagascar attache une attention particulière à la coopération dans des programmes de recherche et de développement technique, qui est un moyen de parvenir à un partage juste et équitable des avantages découlant de l'utilisation des ressources génétiques. Le deuxième point que j'aimerais soulever concerne donc les changements de protection, allant de la protection des résultats vers leur valorisation. Dans les pratiques habituelles de la recherche académique, surtout dans les universités, il y a un souci de protéger les résultats de recherche obtenus, qui fait que dans les publications faites par les universitaires, la codification peut être utilisée. Il y a toujours un risque à rendre publics les résultats de recherche, mobilisant les ressources génétiques, parce qu'il n'y a pas de protection pour ces travaux. Dans un premier temps, donc, il y a lieu de penser à la protection de ces travaux, d'autant plus qu'il y a des savoirs traditionnels qui ont pu être utilisés par les chercheurs, et c'est souvent le cas. On devrait réfléchir à ces questions-là. Recherche académique qui peut par la suite aboutir à des utilisations commerciales. Le droit de propriété intellectuelle, on parlait plutôt de copropriété, devra être envisagé en cas d'utilisation de la ressource. Évidemment, il y a les changements d'intention en cours de route, et donc il y a une nouvelle demande qui pourra toujours être faite. Là, je pense que le rôle capital qui devra être joué par la commission ad hoc qui est rattachée à l'autorité nationale compétente, qui inclut le secteur de la recherche dans les évaluations des demandes d'accès, est vraiment primordial. Il y a également tout ce qui est suivi des activités de recherche sur les plantes. Il y a trop de travaux qui sont menés et on devrait être au courant. Il y a des relations entre les divers secteurs qui devront être un peu plus dynamiques. Le troisième point concerne donc les connaissances traditionnelles qui sont associées aux ressources génétiques. J'ai mis entre guillemets, c'est dans le slide prochain s'il vous plaît, hein? Le prochain slide. Voilà, j'ai mis entre guillemets gratuite exploitation des connaissances traditionnelles qui sont associées aux ressources génétiques, qui sont utilisées par les chercheurs aussi bien nationaux que étrangers. Il est bien sûr reconnu que les communautés locales ont une grande connaissance des ressources génétiques et des plantes médicinales. Cette connaissance est mise au service de la communauté, mais également utilisée par la recherche dans les entreprises pour en extraire les substances commercialisables. Ces savoirs, dans nos pays, nous le connaissons tous, sont oraux et sont transmis de génération en génération. Ils ne sont pas enregistrés comme dans des pays asiatiques, notamment. Ils ne sont pas considérés comme des savoirs scientifiques. Ils ont donc un statut particulier. Ils sont assimilés aux ressources génétiques fournies par la nature. À Madagascar, nous avons quelques publications, des recueils de ces connaissances traditionnelles. Nous avons 2 grandes pharmacopées locales dans le centre-est et dans le nord-est de Madagascar. Nous avons des monographies de plantes, mais toujours localisées dans l'espace. Il y a des inventaires qui sont ponctuels dans l'espace et dans le temps, notamment quand on a créé les aires protégées de Madagascar. Mais toutes ces données, finalement, toutes ces données, ces informations ne sont pas complètes. La recherche continue à travailler là-dessus jusqu'à maintenant. Je voudrais juste, pour illustrer mes propos, informer que les inventaires qui ont été réalisés sur Madagascar font état d'environ 3700 plantes médicinales sur les 12 000 espèces que compte la flore malgache. Si on veut donc assurer la protection, la valorisation de ces connaissances traditionnelles dans le cadre de l'APA, il y a lieu de gérer, de rassembler ces connaissances. Nous avons commencé dans le pays à le faire avec les détenteurs de ces connaissances, avec les praticiens au niveau local. Nous avons établi donc, nous sommes en train de travailler sur un document de référence sur les savoirs traditionnels, en commençant par un certain nombre de maladies qui sont prioritaires pour le pays, à savoir les maladies antidiarrhéiques, les pathologies respiratoires, les plantes utilisées pour l'hypertension artérielle. Et donc, pour nous, ça va être une base de données à partir de laquelle toutes les recherches, tous les travaux devront se référer. Il y a également une nécessité de sensibiliser les détenteurs des connaissances traditionnelles à protéger leurs droits et pour qu'ils exigent le consentement préalable en connaissance de cause. Ça également, malgré le fait qu'on ait déjà 10 ans, on commence, nous, Madagascar a eu le décret APA en 2017, mais on commence à reconnaître, à connaître un peu les tenants et les aboutissants de ces processus APA. Mais en 2002, Madagascar a reconnu légalement les tradipraticiens. Et je pense que c'est vraiment une bonne chose. Et une dernière chose également, c'est que je crois que la point focal en a parlé, Loul en a parlé tout à l'heure, cette responsabilisation des chercheurs dans l'exploitation des connaissances traditionnelles dont les avantages découlant de leur utilisation doivent faire l'objet de partage avec les détenteurs de ces connaissances. Voilà donc très succinctement quelques points que nous avons soulevé donc en vue de continuer la mise en œuvre de ce protocole de Nagoya ou de ce décret APA pour Madagascar. Et ces activités devront relever de la commission ad hoc qui est maintenant rattachée à l'agence, à l'autorité nationale compétente. Voilà, mesdames et messieurs, je vous remercie. Merci Andrew.
Thank you so much, Claudine. Thank you so much, Lolona, for that introduction of the ABS system in Madagascar, and also the experience from the research point of view on the key issues and challenges that you are facing when trying to implement the ABS and the Nagoya Protocol at national level. We will come back to you with some other questions. And again, I encourage all the colleagues to write their questions in the Q&A section. And towards the end, we will bring those questions to the different panelists. Now we would like to move on to Jordan. Again, we are having Arabic interpretation, so even if you are the ones that have not access to that channel, this is just to encourage the two speakers that we have from Jordan to feel free to speak in Arabic, as their interventions will be interpreted into English and French, okay? Let me introduce you Engineer Bilal Katzait as the Director of Nature Protection, Ministry of Environment of Jordan. Bilal, I would like to know what is the status of ABS in the country. I know you have been pushing ABS legislation in the last years, but we would like to know what is the status and what is the key features that and how you approach research within that system. Bilal, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alejandro. Good evening, everybody, because in Jordan now it is afternoon. Happy birthday for ABS for these 10-year universal years. We are happy to be one of the countries implement the project. And we very thankful for Mr. Alejandro and Claudio for them support along that time we implement the project, and in addition my colleagues in UNDP office and other colleagues in other institutions and local communities, universities, all who participate with us in preparing or implement the project. One of outputs of our project is going to have a national framework. We have it now, and I think it is good and reflect what we need to implement the Nagoya protocol. In relation between researcher, we talk with all researchers in Jordan in different levels. We try to understanding them needs to work under Nagoya. We have two types of researchers. One of them is for commercial issue and the other for academic issues. In our bio, we make different articles for them. We take care the needs for academic research because it is depending on them studies and like that. So we put the time to get the approval or send the approval for them by 90 days. And we discussed this period with them. They said it is good for us and need that time to can know the time for collection of genetic resources and depending on the seasons. But for commercial issues, we put the time period as what have in a protocol. I think it is good for us and to reviewing documents and talking with all stakeholders according that. By this way, I think we can calculate, collect the every needs for all stakeholders, and they have many workshops, dialogues with them, and finally have this accepting from all them. In addition for that, we take care about BCB. This is very important for local communities, and we have now protocol for BCB. We're going to announce it in according with bylaw to take care with researcher when they going to local community to collect the genetic resources if they need it. This is what we have according to researcher people, researchers, and center research. And now we are going to make special training for food and agriculture organization, because they are the national focal points for registration of any medicine or any cosmetics. And they have connection with whole world to work with us as checkpoint. They was attend us in all preparation, all steps for preparation the bylaw, and they now understanding what we have in bylaw. This is what we have, and in addition, we cover the gray area between the international treaty and Nagoya Protocol, and how going to research for international treaty at Nagoya. We have separate articles about that. This is what we have, Alejandro, and thank you all time for your advice in these topics, you and Claudio. Thank you for all team who's work on these projects and other people to work with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bilal, for your kind words and for your introduction of the ABS system in Jordan. We have Dr. Khaled Abu Laila, who is the director of the Plant Biodiversity and Genetic Resources within the National Agriculture Research Center in Jordan. Dr. Khaled, you have a quite unique position. Yes. As you are implementing research projects utilizing genetic resources, but you are also in that kind of gray area, no, between the Nagoya Protocol, yes, and the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources. What is your experience in the when you implement these kind of projects, and what kind of challenges are you facing at the moment?
Yes, thank you very much, Alejandro, and thank you for all the curators of this event, and happy anniversary for the Nagoya Protocol, that we really were pleased to have it being put into effect in the last couple of years here in Jordan. To start, I will just give a brief about Jordan and how the diversity of Jordan is remarkable. Just briefly, Jordan is very rich in floral diversity. It hosts more than 2,600 wild species that are resulted from diversity in habitats. Amongst the many species are many species of global importance for human nutrition, like crop wild relatives, medicinal species, wild edible species, and in addition to that, the land races that have been improved and developed by the local farmers in the remote areas. Those are that are unique due to the exotic habitats in which they occur. For Jordan, as part of the Fertile Crescent, the oldly known Fertile Crescent, which hosts Jordan, Syria, Iraq, and Palestine, they are considered part of the cradle of cultivation on the global level. And according to Vavilov identification of the centers of origin, it hosts two centers of origin, or the species of two centers of origin, namely the Asia Minor and the Mediterranean, which makes it host a wealth of globally important crop wild relatives and wild edible species that are important for the genes to needed for the food security of the whole world. What we do is nowadays and in the past, we do research and main tasks toward conservation and utilization of what we identify as plant genetic resources for food and agriculture, particularly in our institution. The three pillars that we identify here are the crop wild relatives, which are the main interest of ours, which, as I said, unique resource that Jordan and the surrounding region have. And the second pillar is the wild edible species, which occupies good and big wealth in Jordan that has been going back to the history, deep in the history during the start of the cultivation and the interest of plants by the humankind. And the last pillar is the land races, the local land races. Those local land races, those are the, let's say, the varieties, the plant varieties, and particularly also the animal varieties that has been grown and selected and taken care of by the local farmers according to to their preferences and the surrounding prevailing conditions, which makes them adapted and source of genes as well as crop wild relatives. We do research of utilization. You know, the crop wild relatives, depending upon how close the gene pool is to the commercial varieties, they are more or less, we call them sometimes the cousins of cultivated crops in the same way that the wolf is related to the dog. Crop wild relatives are related to our food plants. As broad definition, they are all taxa within the same genus as a crop that are of great importance because they are crossable to the commercial varieties, and at the same time they have the resistance tolerance genes because they stayed in their center of origin, so they kept evolving with the time. This gives even more importance to them because they are evolving over the time with prevailing up-to-date conditions, including climate change, including pollutions, including all the surrounding conditions. This gives them even more importance as unique. And because they are crossable, they are really demanded by the whole world. Most of our users, most of the utilizers of our genetic resources are from overseas, which is now a drawback that we got here and the challenge that we should overcome. And this is something that I wanted to push to, is to encourage as much as possible the local utilization of our crop wild relatives and other genetic resources that are really used by overseas utilizers and with minimal level by ours. Well, as my colleague Bilal just mentioned, the issue of the gray areas, you know, we in Jordan, we have ratified as well as we ratified the CBD, we ratified by 2001 the international treaty, which is the kind of similar or parallel treaty similar to the CBD in terms of the pillars, which includes conservation, sustainable utilization, and access and benefit sharing of the genetic resources, the benefits arising from those genetic resources. However, the mechanism of doing this is different under the umbrella of the international treaty, with the proposition that this is important mainly for food and agriculture, and it's assumed to be shared easily by the stakeholders or the users in a kind of more elastic and easy way easier than the Nagoya Protocol to an extent, or relatively. Also, here the presence of the two treaties, the implications of different governance of different genetic resources comes from the origin of the treaty and the main goal of each of the conventions. For the treaty, it takes care of everything, and the treaty as a whole takes care of all of what is known as plant genetic resources for food and agriculture. However, as for the transfer of the material, what is known as the SMTA, which is the Standard Transfer Material Agreement that belongs to the treaty, cares only with Annex 1 species that are about 64 genera, under which the transfer assumed to be very easy in order because they are assumed to be milestones in food of the world. Here, the gray area arises whenever you deal with species that are taking place in situ, and they are not under the public domain in the gene banks, and the utilizers or the users would like to use it. They, in many cases, they have a conflict of reference to who they should go and how to use it, regardless if they are locals or from outsiders. And in many cases also, lots of those important genetic resources, they are important for food and agriculture, and at the same time, they are not in the Annex 1 of the international treaty, so their transfer goes to the CBD focal point. This is one of the challenges that we are, as Bilal said, we are going toward addressing those challenges step by step. We, as I might have mentioned before, we suffer from lack of or minimal utilization of our genetic resources by our local researchers on different levels and up to the end product. And here I have the opinion of making everything as easy as possible, of course, under the legal framework, to push toward more utilization by our utilizers and our users, rather than restricting this on the overseas users. As examples of what we do now, or what we did in the past and still being done now, many memorandums of understandings has been done between us and lots of well-known, remarkable overseas institutions, on top of which, like the Royal Botanic Garden at Kew, our memorandum of understanding started by 2000. By that time, there was no putting into effect of the Nagoya Protocol as it is now. In spite of that, there has been many phrases that addresses the issues of benefits that goes to the users, the donors to the users. We have also memorandum of understanding as an example with the IPK in Germany. We have the most recent one was the CGA, the Center of the Genetic Resources in the Netherlands, where we collaborated in safeguarding loss of crop wild relatives. And as part of the collaboration, we got the know-how from them in the up-to-date pre-breeding methods to make eligible our genetic resources utilizable or usable by the local and overseas users.
Okay, I have to stop you here. Otherwise, you are going to give us the entire list of examples, and we give you already double time that initially allocated, Dr. Halet. You want to make a final point?
There are a little bit only. Yes. Again, I would like to focus on this trust and move forward, what I call a trust and move forward. We need to develop trust between the users and the donors. We need to address the traditional knowledge rights and the authentication and documentation of the traditional knowledge of ours that is being endangered, and we rarely find it nowadays, and to promote the role of the users toward pushing the conservation process in Jordan for the sake of sustainable genetic resources for all. Thank you very much, and sorry for being
no problem, Dr. Halet. It's
you.
A pleasure always to hear you, and you always bring very relevant points, and you were explaining and making also this transition or connection between the international treaty and the Nagoya Protocol. So that's why we gave you a bit of extra margin, okay? And you had very valid points also towards the end. Simple system, easy access process, very important trust and move forward, and also to focus and document traditional knowledge and be able to ensure the rights of the holders of that traditional knowledge, right? Thank you to our colleagues in Madagascar and to the colleagues also in Jordan for introducing these practical examples and the situation of ABS in their countries. We will come back to you in some of the other issues, but let me move forward to the next panelists. In this case, we have Ms. Mary Siachi, who is an international policy officer at the European Commission within the Multilateral Environmental Cooperation Department. Her main task focus on the implementation of the Nagoya Protocol and the development of ABS policy and measures in the European Union. Mary is going to introduce user compliance measures, the implementation of the Nagoya Protocol in the EU. Mary, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alejandro, and good afternoon from Europe to all the participants and to the other colleagues making their presentations before me. Thanks for organizing this event and for inviting us. Yes, I'll try now to share my screen for my presentation. Can you, oh no, sorry, I opened the wrong one. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, let me put it in
full screen.
What is slideshow? Yes, here we are. Okay. Okay, yeah, I will try to introduce you a little bit to the implementation of the Nagoya Protocol in the European Union. Just let me clarify that in the EU, we don't have one single piece of legislation that is regulate access to genetic resources and is valid in all the EU member states, so in the 27 member states. Access to genetic resources is something that falls under the competence of the member states, so it's up to them to decide whether they want to regulate it or not. And you have a list here in my slide of the countries that have decided so far to regulate access. For what concerns the European Union in its entirety, we implement at the EU level the compliance measures of the Nagoya Protocol. This means that we have one single piece of legislation, which is the regulation number 511/2014, which focuses on compliance measures for users in the EU. And its implementation is harmonized in all the EU member states. So it's a legally binding piece of legislation applicable in all EU member states, regardless of the status whether a member state has ratified or not the Nagoya Protocol. The EU ABS regulation is complemented by an implementing regulation, which lays down further detailed rules for the implementation, and also by a guidance document on the scope and core obligations of the regulation. This is a soft law instrument and is there to help users and competent authorities as well to understand to what the regulation applies to and what kinds of obligations derive from it and how users can be compliant from the ABS side. The core obligation of our regulation is the due diligence. This is an obligation established upon all users in the EU, so researchers, but also private companies. All users, we mean all people that do research and development on genetic resources. The obligation consists in seeking, keeping, and transferring to subsequent users all relevant information related to ABS. So, for instance, the IRCC. And if the IRCC is not available, the users have to seek all and keep all information and documentation related to the access, the date of access, the type of genetic resources, if there are any rights applicable to that genetic resources, if there is a peak, if he has negotiated a MAT. All this information have to be sought by the user, have to be stored, kept for 20 years. And in case they transfer a research, let's say researchers transfers the genetic resources to another researchers or to a private company, he has to transfer it together with all this relevant documentation. In case the information is not available or the documents are not available, he should discontinue the utilization. How do we monitor the users in the European Union? We have established 2 checkpoints which are the same in all the EU member states. The first one is established at the stage of research funding. So when the research involves utilization of genetic resources and or an associated traditional knowledge, the recipient of the fund has the obligation to submit a due diligence declaration. The due diligence declaration consists in a declaration that can be done through in an electronic form and filed to our platform, Declare, which is the platform that we have created for this. And it contains all those relevant information that I mentioned before. So the reference to the IRCC, but also to the kind of the type of genetic resources, the date of access, and so on and so forth. The second checkpoint is the one at the time of pre-commercialization. So at the final stage of development of the product, the process is similar. Also in this situation, the user has to collect, store the information and file this due diligence declaration to the competent authorities in the member states where he or she is established. And I will go now to the next slide to be a bit faster than before. And how this information then is gathered and transferred to the ABS Clearinghouse. Here is a flowchart that explains a bit the first checkpoint. As you can see, we have established a mechanism to request the recipients of funds, so the researchers, to file a due diligence declarations when they receive funds. And they can do this from the moment they receive the first installment of the research grant until the final stage of development of the product. So let's say just before handing the final report that concludes your research project. So the obligation exists and can be fulfilled along this time frame. When the due diligence declaration is completed, they can file it through our electronic platform, Declare, to the competent authorities. Some member states have decided to have their own platform and they don't use Declare, but this is an option. In all cases, there's always the possibility to file this in an electronic form. And then the competent authority transfers these to the ABS Clearinghouse. And this is when the due diligence declaration becomes the checkpoint communique. Of course, if the information contained in the declaration is confidential, it will not be made available on the ABS Clearinghouse, but the competent authority will transfer the due diligence declaration with the confidential information directly to the CNA of the provider country. This is a flowchart that explains the second checkpoint. It's very similar. The process is similar to the other one. Just maybe here it's important to flag that we have identified as a final stage of development these 5 moments. So when a product requires authorization to be put on the market, or a notification, or when it's simply put on the market for the first time, or when the result of the utilization is sold or transferred to someone else, or is transferred outside the European Union. So in all these cases, they have to file a due diligence declaration, and then the process of making this available into the ABS Clearinghouse or the CNA of the provider country is the same. In the EU, we have also established a duty upon the member states and the competent authorities in member states to carry out checks on users' compliance. So the users in the EU have the obligation to keep to seek and keep all relevant permits and information, to make a due diligence declarations, but they can also be subject to checks by the competent authorities. These checks are organized on the basis of a risk-based approach plan that is developed by the competent authorities, and we know by now that some of them have already started to do, for instance, on-site visit on checks to companies, for instance, but they are also doing some online checks via questionnaires to researchers, for instance, and they're doing a lot of raising awareness as well while doing these checks. In the EU, the member states have also the obligation to establish penalties in case the users are found in violation of due diligence obligations. That means that if the users has not stored the information, kept it for the necessary time, or filed the due diligence declaration, or didn't obtain a PIC while it should have done it, in these cases it can be punished. In all member states have by now decided the level of sanctions. This can vary from a member state to another one, because this is again something that has to be decided by the member states and cannot be decided at the EU level. Only one member state is still in the process of adopting this. Finally, we have also 2 voluntary tools to support users' compliance. One is the register collections, and the other one is the recognition of ABS best practices. The first instruments, the principle behind it is that if a user obtains the genetic resources from a registered collection, then he should be considered to have exercised due diligence concerning the seeking of the information. Why is that? Because actually, to become a registered collection, a collection needs to set up mechanisms and tools to ensure that the material they have is ABS compliant. So they will have to do all the part of seeking relevant information for ABS, like the permits, or like if there are rights applicable, or if there is a need to negotiate a MAT. They have to collect all this information. They transfer it together with the genetic material to the person that goes to acquire it from the registered collection. In case they need to get another permit, or to get another or to negotiate another MAT, they will be informed by the collection if there are ABS obligations to be compliant with. Well, then it's a choice for the collection. They can decide to establish this tool. They can file an application to the member state. In that case, the member states, if recognize that the collection meets all the criteria, then they transfer the information to the European Commission, and we have created an online register where we publish the information concerning the registered collection. By now we have 3 registered collections. The ABS best practices, the principle behind this is that if a user follows a best practice, an ABS best practices that has been recognized as ABS best practices under the regulation, he is supposed to follow some procedures that will help him to comply with ABS obligations. So a member state can decide that he will not do checks on that user because he knows already that he follows a certain set of procedures that will help him and will ensure that he's compliant from the ABS perspective. But of course, the user still has the obligation to file the due diligence declaration and all the rest of due diligence obligations as explained before. In this case, is an association of users that can submit to the Commission the application for recognition of best practices. And if we consult the member states, of course, along the process, and in case a submission meets all the criteria, we can recognize it. For now, we have 1 ABS best practice recognized in the EU. So one may wonder, is this system working? For now, what we are observing is that the first checkpoint communicate submitted to the ABS Clearinghouse were submitted by EU member states, and now, if I'm correct, we have 31 checkpoints communiqué onto the ABS Clearinghouse, and 28 come from the EU member states. So operational, the system can be considered operational and fully working from this point of view, at least. Then one may wonder, so if it's working, why there is a relative small amount of checkpoints communicate. And I think that this can be attributed to the fact that some time was required to make the system fully operational. Member states needed to set up designated competent authorities. We needed to develop this platform. So some time for giving the engine and the wheels to the machine was needed. But there's also another factor that should be taken into account, which is the fact that, as I said before, for instance, for the research, in the case of researchers have the possibility to file the due diligence declaration, which is the one that turns into checkpoint communiqué, along the duration of the research project from the beginning until the very end. And we know that a research project that utilize genetic resources can go from 5 to 6 years, but also can be extended, can be longer than that. And also the time needed to develop a product based on genetic resources is quite long. We know that the minimum is 3-4 years, but we hear also that this can take many, many years. So this can also, these are factors that should be taken into account. In terms of impacts of the EU ABS regulation in the EU, I think that it has significantly increased the level of awareness about ABS among stakeholders, certainly among researchers, but also the private sector. I stressed on researchers because actually researchers were those less familiar with ABS. So, and they were also caught a little bit by surprise about the fact that they had to be compliant from ABS perspective, but the regulation has certainly increased their level of awareness. And now they're doing, I would say, considerable efforts really to comply with ABS requirements of provider countries, also because they know they can be subject to checks and they can get penalties in case they don't respect ABS requirements. In general, I think it has contributed to put ABS into governmental agendas in the EU. Of course, it's not all roses. We have also challenges. In premise, I would say ABS is a highly technical topic, and it's quite challenging for not only for users, but also for competent authorities. It requires knowledge of specific sectors, and also knowledge needs to be built in institutions as well. So there is a continuous need for awareness raising about access and benefit sharing in general. Then another challenge that our users, and in particular our researchers, are encountering is the variety of ABS domestic legislations worldwide. We know that this is for, I mean, every country has a different system to regulate access, different permits. Sometimes you have to contact several institutions. And to some extent, this lack of standardizations is a bit discouraging the researchers and also the private companies, because the process is quite complicated. But despite this, they're all putting their best efforts to comply with ABS. And I think I can conclude here. So happy birthday to the Nagoya Protocol.
Thank you so much, Mary. Thank you for your introduction of the compliance measures at the EU level. As an immediate reaction, and also highlighting the issue of awareness of the different measures, in particular for researchers, I would like to ask the previous panelists if they have noticed in their jurisdictions, in their countries, the implementation of the EU regulation, if they have received more queries about the ABS procedures by national researchers or even by European researchers. So I would like to go back to the colleagues in Madagascar and in Jordan to hear from them if they have noticed the implementation of this EU regulation in their countries. Lolona?
Oui, merci Alessandro. La réponse de ma part, c'est que vraiment, il y a beaucoup de demandes d'accès donc pour les chercheurs nationaux qu'on reçoit presque quotidiennement. Et alors, on leur demande donc de fournir vraiment un document de projet qui nous offre donc les détails sur les perspectives d'utilisation donc des ressources auxquelles ils veulent accéder. Parce que, comme j'ai dit dans mon introduction de tout à l'heure, il y a les ressources génétiques concernées dans le champ d'application, mais il faut également noter que ce n'est pas tous les types de recherche ou d'utilisation qui sont concernés par la réglementation, c'est la recherche et développement qui travaille donc sur la composition génétique et biochimique des ressources génétiques. Donc, on examine vraiment leur document de projet pour leur orienter qu'effectivement, il faut suivre les principes de l'APA ou bien que c'est une recherche qui a plus trait à la taxonomie ou à une recherche fondamentale vraiment pour développer des connaissances justes sur les ressources. C'est comme ça, mais il y a beaucoup de chercheurs qui se renseignent auprès de nous.
One immediate follow-up question to you, Lolona. Have you established or are you trying to establish a checkpoint in compliance with the Nagoya Protocol? How is that in Madagascar?
Alors, malheureusement, on n'a pas encore désigné donc, les points de contrôle pour le suivi de l'utilisation des ressources génétiques, mais on a déjà donc quelques idées sur des institutions phares qui seraient importantes à être impliquées donc, dans le suivi de l'utilisation des ressources génétiques. Entre autres, donc, pour vous donner un exemple, c'est l'Office malgache de la propriété industrielle et intellectuelle, donc qui pourra faire un suivi donc, de l'utilisation en matière de brevetage des produits issus des ressources de Madagascar, par exemple.
Thank you very much, Lolona. Our colleagues from Jordan, any feedback on these specific points?
Yes, Alejandro. We have I think three, one to Germany, to an institute in Germany in cooperation with student in Jordan. For research and commercial, they have BIC and we follow with them, and one with UK, but the UK is for special case because they want to have serum of goats and sheep, but we fear they can take the serum or make the detection for serum in Jordan. Maybe they need to take the blood. So blood, it is genetic resources. We have the big to ensure if that's happened and recording it. And we have other with French with Pasteur Institute. But the Pasteur Institute, it is before Nagoya protocol. They are going to doing that to registering it under Nagoya, some of microbes and genetic resources taken in 1995. That's we have until now, and we following up with them time with time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bilal. So definitely we can see that beyond the specific measures that are and the system that these compliance measures put in place at the national level or the regional level, in the case of the EU, these can have a positive impact, no? Also in third jurisdictions, as they bring the attention to researchers and other users to comply with the measures at the national level, and that can also have an impact, a positive impact in the implementation at the national level, no? Calling the attention of national researchers to be able to comply with those systems in order to collaborate with other networks, no? Like the ones in the European Union. Fantastic. Yes, Khaled, Dr. Khaled, you want to make a point on this, please?
Sorry, I just wanted to mention another example that we encountered in the 2015 upon the commencement of collaboration between us and the Netherlands and the Center of Genetic Resources at the Netherlands. We were planning to include in the Memorandum of Understanding between us all of the crop wild relatives native to Jordan for working for utilization and conservation. And because of only one particular genus, which is the Lactuca, we had to transfer the SMTA into an MTA because the SMTA covers all of the Annex 1. And this one is, although it is plant genetic resources for food and agriculture, but it is not in Annex 1. So we had to change the whole agreement from SMTA, which belongs to the treaty, to the MTA, and we had the prior informed consent and all of the stuff that is needed from the focal point of the CBD ultimately. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that example also. Very good. We would like now to move into the specific issue of digital sequence information. And again, I encourage all the attendees, all the participants to write your questions to the previous speakers, and we will ask some of them in the final section under Q&A. So I would like to make a very short introduction to the issue of digital sequence information. No? This issue of digital sequence information on genetic resources was first raised at COP13 in Cancun, Mexico in 2016. The parties decided to consider at their next respective meetings any potential implications of the use of this information for the objectives of the CBD, the Convention, and the Nagoya Protocol. The term digital sequence information does not have an internationally agreed meaning, and it is just used as a kind of placeholder until there is more clarity on the concept and its scope. Then we expect that a more appropriate terminology could be developed and used. In Decision 14/20, parties recognize the importance of digital sequence information on genetic resources for the three objectives of the Convention, which are mutually supportive, and that access to and use of DSI contributes to scientific research as well as to other non-commercial and commercial activities. It was also recognized that further capacity to access, use, generate, and analyze DSI is needed in many countries. However, there is a divergence of views among parties regarding benefit sharing arising from the use of DSI. The issue relates to the increasing speed and falling costs of sequencing, which have resulted in an enormous quantity of biological data being produced and stored in accessible databanks, which are used for research and development, including for commercial purposes. This happens in the absence of benefit sharing obligations, and many parties and other actors are concerned that this will negatively impact on the third objective of the Convention and also in the objective of the Nagoya Protocol. Others are concerned that imposing access and benefit sharing obligations on DSI will have a negative impact on open access to information for research, including for conservation and sustainable use. Bearing in mind the importance of new technologies for the current and future utilization of genetic resources needs, this needs to be further considered, and a concerted and cost-effective international approach to this issue could help to provide legal certainty for all parties involved. Okay, that was a kind of introduction to the topic. And of course, there are some immediate follow-up questions that come after that, no? And in this case, we are very privileged to have with us experts from different areas that are going to help us to better understand the issue of DSI and also its status in the CBD negotiations. First, I would like to introduce and welcome Chris Lyle and Lactisha, who are the co-chairs of the ad hoc technical expert group on digital sequence information on genetic resources. Chris is a biological scientist who has been engaged with ABS for approximately 16 years in the non-commercial biodiversity research and the Nagoya Protocol field. Lactisha, I believe in this regional context of Africa and Arab states, she doesn't need to be introduced, as she is the Deputy Director at the Department of Environment, Forestry and Fisheries, and has more than 15 years of working experience in the field of bioprospecting, access and benefit sharing, policy development and implementation. The key questions that I want to ask Chris and Lactisha is, what is DSI and why is relevant for ABS? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Alejandro. I'm glad you've given us the easy question to start off with. So as Alejandro says, what DSI actually is, what this handy little acronym means, is a matter of, well, some confusion really. And what I'd like to do initially is try and explain a bit where we are with understanding what that meaning is. So DSI is generated during the process of scientific research. And many different processes develop what one might consider to be DSI. The simplest, sequencing the nucleotide order in a strand of DNA or RNA. Structural annotation of those sequences, that is, how the strand folds in on itself, how close these nucleotides might be. The functionality of the genes, what they actually code for, the proteins, and then looking at those proteins, the structure of the proteins, the biochemistry of them. And then there are heritable factors outside the cell nucleus, epigenetic modifications. One of the elements of those has been discussed several times is methylation patterns of cells. That's come up in discussions at the CBD level. And then the metabolites, the molecules within themselves, the cells themselves. So a lot of different things there that might be DSI, but all generated from research. Now, the image in the corner there is one of my colleagues who's currently carrying out research on a group of Central and South American insects. And what she's doing is preparing a sample for sequencing the DNA. She's doing that so she can find differences between species and identify what the species are. When she finishes that research, she'll publish it. Not only the research, but those DNA sequences themselves. This is so other people can use them as a reference, and other people can understand more about the way she did her research and indeed test the research, because all of our research must be able to test. I'll put up the logo there of the INSDC, International Nucleotide Sequence Database Collaboration. It's a group of 3 really large databases around the world who collaborate. They are sharing, making available millions of DNA sequences, RNA sequences from all sorts of sources. They're not the only place where such sequences or DSI can be found. Those databases themselves feed about 1,700 plus other databases automatically. And there are many, many others. So there are a lot of databases out there from which third parties can download and use the contents. And a key concept, I guess, for DSI is that the availability of these research results, this DSI, is available on databases outside the immediate control of the country where the initial genetic resource was accessed. As Alejandro said, DSI is a placeholder term. And one of the documents which was provided for the RTEG was a study of the different concepts, the different scopes of the term DSI as used by different people. And this image is from that study. And it shows, if you like, a set of increasingly inclusive concepts from the simplest DNA, RNA, nucleotide sequence data, maybe including proteins, the order of the chemicals in the proteins, maybe including cellular metabolites, maybe including the subsidiary information about that, how the analysis was done, where the original genetic resource was accessed, many, many other bits of additional information. And broadest term of all, in silico or natural information. Now, I'm not going to go into definitions. The definitions are in that study and they're really useful. But as you see, many different ideas. Each of these different concepts has different properties as well as different names. They're found in different places and used by different stakeholders in different ways. And negotiators in the CBD and indeed elsewhere, they need to be able to understand what the actual scope is that they're discussing at any one time, just to be sure they're all talking about the same thing, if for no other reason. And it's therefore necessary to understand, to have a greater clarity on what the term really means and encompasses. And that's why the remit of the RTEG, the Technical Expert Group, set up under the CBD, by the CBD, this year included options for operational terms and their implications to provide conceptual clarity on DSI. So this is to help negotiators be clear what the topic is, and to help them understand what should be included, might be included within the concept of DSI. So in this discussion, the RTEG made use of that report I mentioned. There's a link at the bottom of this slide and the next two slides to documentation, which if you wish to look at it, there's this report and several others which are extraordinarily valuable. Anyway, the RTEG identified three different groupings of items which might make up DSI based on the degree of biological processing undertaken to produce them and their closeness, their propinquity to the underlying genetic resource. And that's the table from the RTEG report. And as you see, three groups. First is that nucleotide sequence data, DNA, RNA sequences. The second includes that, but also includes proteins. That's what the DNA is coding for. And epigenetic modifications, these extranuclear heritable factors. And the third includes those two and metabolites, other macromolecules found in the cell. And there's also the associated information, which is not part of those groups. So as I said, those proposed three groups are cumulative. The second group includes the first. The third group includes the second and the first. The associated information was not included in any of those groups. As I said, that information includes various contextual information for the genetic resource, for the DSI itself, but also associated traditional knowledge. And the RTEG considered that those first groups could be considered as DSI, but the associated information, including associated traditional knowledge, would not be considered DSI. Although the RTEG was very clear about the obligation to share benefits arising from utilization of associated traditional knowledge under the Nagoya Protocol and the CBD. That's where the RTEG got to, that's in the report, and that report now will be for the negotiators to deal with. The RTEG wasn't making any rulings, the RTEG was providing information for the negotiators to use. So that's handed over to the negotiators, and I'm now going to hand over the presentation to my colleague Leticia to carry on.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Alejandro, for this opportunity to share with the participants why is DSI relevant for ABS. DSI is generally believed and understood to be a product of utilization of genetic resources. And once DSI is generated or created, it can be used as a surrogate for the original genetic resources in the research and development process. So in other words, you cannot have a DSI without having had first contact with the physical genetic resources. However, once you have created a DSI, then it can also be used as a surrogate and still carry on with the research and development without having to worry about the physical access to a genetic resources. As Chris has touched on it in his previous slide, how the researchers create or generate this DSI, which end up being deposited in these big databases. We see that once they are in those big databases, acquiring them and utilizing them, it now operates outside the modalities worked out in the Nagoya Protocol. And I think the modality that we are talking about under the Nagoya Protocol is whereby before a genetic resource can be accessed, there must be what we call a prior informed consent and mutually agreed terms in place. So, but once the DSI are deposited or accessed from this big database, they get subjected to what we call open access. So with that situation, many countries see the use of DSI as a workflow that can lead to the same outcome as utilization of genetic resources. However, there is some challenges with that approach because the benefit sharing requirement component of the ABS principle, it doesn't get applied properly in that arrangement of open access. And they are now seeking the global community under the CBD to work towards a modality for ensuring the sharing of the benefits from the utilization of DSI. And just to show the seriousness of this issue of benefit sharing arrangement from the utilization of DSI, coming from various views and studies that were conducted by the CBD Secretariat, we see that there are some countries that have started to develop or include DSI in their national framework on ABS, trying to address issues of benefit sharing. But those national legislation, they also bring a lot of limitations because if you look at the manner in which DSI are being created or generated, you'll find that the ABS requirement that you'll have in place will be with a researcher who is only focusing on the non-commercial objective of that particular research work. And then once they finish their research work and deposit the sequence and publish the final result, then they are no longer interested in any further development or work on that particular DSI that has been deposited in the big database. Then it becomes open to whoever wants to commercialize further. And that creates a huge gap in terms of the benefit sharing modalities that is expected from the utilization of this DSI for commercial purposes. And they are also coming to the CBD community to say, let's work together and come up with an innovative solution that could close this gap around the benefit sharing arising from the use of DSI. Thank you.
Thank you to both of you, Chris, Leticia. I really like one of the sentences that is covering in your presentation that refers to the fact that negotiators need to be able to understand what they are discussing, no? Something that we normally give for granted, no? But in the ABS issue, as this is quite horizontal, and normally environment departments are the one in charge, they don't have this technical or scientific capacity, no? In the same way that they may not have the knowledge of human rights for other issues connected with ABS, no? So it is crucial, and one of the key reasons why we are promoting this and organizing this conference is to promote this kind of dialogues, no? So this is just first step, but we want this to continue at the national level. We want to provoke all the governments, national competent authorities to better understand, to know what is there, and to know and understand the challenges that are ahead of us, all of us, no? And the need to address them in the next months, no? So thank you, Leticia, Chris, wonderful to have you. And of course, as we move forward and we have more information, we want to know more. And I have another question now, because this seems to be an issue of the developed world. that is not taking into account the developing world. So I would like to know actually who is using DSI. For this question, I would like to introduce Dr. Amber Scholes, who is the deputy to the director at the Leibniz Institute DSMZ, the German collection for microorganisms and cell cultures. She headed the team that led to her institution becoming the first registered collection under the Nagoya Protocol in the European Union. And she was also the head author of the combined study on digital sequence information in public and private databases and traceability, submitted in January 2020 to the parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity. Amber, thank you very much for being with us today. And who is using DSI?
Thank you, Alejandro. I'm Agustina or Alejandro. I'm being told by my computer that I cannot turn my video on because the host doesn't want it.
I will talk with the host, which is not
talk
me.
With the host.
My team.
See if you
no
want me.
No problem, Amber.
Exactly. Agustina is in charge.
Can you see my screen?
We can see your screen.
Okay,
now you should be able
video.
to share to turn on your camera.
So now
sorry, Amber.
But do you see my screen too?
Camera and screen. We see both now.
Okay. Thank you for your patience. Thank you, Alejandro. Thank you, Agustina. Hello, good morning or good afternoon, depending on which country you are. So Chris and Letitia provided a perfect sort of entry into what I will talk about. So they actually covered a lot of the information and the highlights from the CBD studies 1 and 4. So on the DSI definition question, and then on the DSI legislation question, which countries are already providing or have legislation on DSI, and some of the outputs of the AdTech. But what I would like to do, as Alejandro suggested, is actually give you some highlights, just a few snapshots from the study that I led, which we call affectionately Study 2-3, because it was a combined study on public and private databases as well as traceability. But I'll be focusing actually more on the databases and what's in there and who's using them. And that link down there can get you straight to that, or the link that Chris also put up in his slides. The first thing, though, I have to do is we have to have a little bit of science class first, because I think there might be some people that took biology a long time ago. And so I would just pose the question, especially perhaps to policymakers, are you proud of your country's unique biodiversity? I hope so, you should be. But if you are, please understand the scientific perspective. It's only possible to understand the genetic biodiversity if your sequences are compared to others. So let me prove it to you. Let me give you a quiz, just like we're back in school. So what does this mean? What do these letters mean? Can you tell me what they mean? Probably not. I can't either. But how would you go about figuring out what those letters mean? The way that we do this in the world of biological research is we take these letters and we compare them to the sequence databases where there's lots of other letters. And when we find pieces, so lots of letters or sections of sequences that are similar to others, we start to figure out what parts of that sequence data means. And that's the fundamental biological reason why we use these databases. We also do it for ethical reasons, for transparency, for publication, for funding reasons. But the main reason is to actually understand what these letters mean. So let me use the example of learning a new language. So I had to learn German, for example, and maybe you first learned the word for soil or for earth. And it turns out that's the word Erde in Germany. But then you might also start to learn other words as you get more advanced in your understanding. And you learn a word like Erdnuss or Erdbeer. And you start to see these similarities between these words and these organisms. And you start to make connections. Oh, look, this word Erd here and here are all similar. And that's, of course, if you think about it, it makes sense, right? Because a peanut grows close to the ground and a strawberry also grows close to the ground. So they have this concept of ground all in common. And of course, this metaphor is not perfect, but this is the basic idea of why we like to compare sequences. And in fact, why we have to compare sequences to each other in order to understand them. So with that little science course, I'd like to now take you into the databases and answer 3 questions, or try to. What is the flow of DSI from a scientist putting it into a database, and then the users that use it? Number 2, is DSI mostly derived from genetic resources from developing countries? And then is that DSI then used mostly by scientists in developed countries? So sort of this traditional classic provider-user idea. So the first question is no. Most DSI that is in the databases comes from 4 countries right now. That's China, the United States, Canada, and Japan. If you add those percentages up, that's where the geographically tagged sequences come from. So within these public sequence databases, within these DSI databases, there is a field that explains or that tells the scientist where that sequence came from, what its country of origin was. And that's what this world map shows on a logarithmic scale, where the sequences came from. So you can see that this is not where the genetic resource was sequenced. This is the country of origin, and that these 4 countries provide over half of the DSI. The next question then, again, looking at a world map, where are the users of these DSI sequences? They live in every country in the world, and there are about 10 to 15 million users. And similar to the country of origin for DSI, you see again, the United States and China leading, and you see a few new ones popping up here from Asia, India, and Japan, and then my host country, Germany, as well as other countries here in Europe, in South America, and in Russia. The other interesting idea about this is that this database infrastructure that the whole world uses is not for free. It costs about $50 million per year. It's paid for by the governments of the USA, member states of Europe, and Japan. But half of the users of this infrastructure live in countries whose governments do not contribute to the infrastructure costs. And so one might say that their use, the use of those users not paying for the infrastructure cost, is in fact actually subsidized. And that's a good thing. It means that we really have global access to DSI. It does not mean we are all on even playing fields, but that the platform, the infrastructure itself, enables more openness, enables more equalness. The cool thing you can do with data is you can also start to compare it. So here you're looking at a map where I took the first 2 maps, so the country of origin and the users, and I divided them. So I asked the question, what is the ratio between a country's contribution of DSI into the public database and their users? So here you see interesting countries coming out, not just the US and China leading, but countries like Lebanon, Ukraine, Belarus, Iraq, Colombia, Algeria, Pakistan, Korea, Belgium, and Poland, where they have many more users of these DSI databases than they contribute sequences to the databases. So heavy use relative to their contribution to the database. Another thing that we've recently looked at, this is data not presented in the CPD study, is where are the authors from that are publishing using DSI? So they're publishing a scientific paper based upon DSI. So this is based on text mining of the European PubMed database, which is a library of scientific publications. And in the column is the country of origin of the DSI. And what we did here was we combined by trading blocks. So OECD would traditionally be your developed economies, G77 would be your developing countries, and BRICS, of course, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, your middle income countries. And then we asked the question, okay, this is where the DSI was sourced from. And then where was the first author of a scientific publication geographically located? And that's the color. So blue here means an OECD located author primarily uses OECD generated or OECD sourced DSI. And then there, of course, are situations where a BRICS author uses OECD data and where a G77 located author uses OECD data. And the reverse is true. The other important thing here to notice is how many more publications come from OECD countries. This is a gap that we want to solve together, but one would argue it is not because the OECD countries or the scientists sitting in those countries are using and exploiting the BRICS and the G77 data, but rather we are in equal portions all using everybody else's data. And so I hope I answered some of those questions. What is the flow of DSI? It is often sourced and used in the same country. So it's the most common situation is that an American scientist is publishing using American sourced DSI. A Chinese scientist most often use Chinese sourced DSI, and that most of us are also using a little bit from everyone else. Is DSI mostly derived from genetic resources from developing countries? No, the data does not show that. And then do the scientists in developed countries use that DSI? Not predominantly. So now that we've looked at the global picture, I thought since we had the kind contributions from two of our focus countries, I would take 4 countries and look at what the data says here. And again, here I will ask the question, what is the DSI where's the DSI coming from? And then the scientist in that country, where is the DSI coming from that they are using? And this is again, all based on open access publication and open access DSI. So we can start with our colleagues from Madagascar. So DSI from Madagascar is used by 47 countries. So a black line shows that this country here, Canada, is using DSI from Madagascar. Of course, this is a summary of multiple publications that sit behind that connection. Then you can look at the reverse. Scientists from Madagascar are using DSI from 29 countries, and they have 682 users that are using that data. The next question, DSI from Cameroon. So we had a colleague on this project from Cameroon. That's why I chose Cameroon. DSI from Cameroon is used by 64 countries. Scientists from Cameroon are using DSI from 38 countries, accounting for 1,335 users. DSI from South Africa is used by 93 countries, about half of the world, and has 30,000 users. Sorry, that should be on this slide. And then scientists from South Africa are using DSI from 147 countries. And my apologies, that previous slide should have had this 30,000 users on this slide. And then the final country, DSI from Jordan, is used by 16 countries. And scientists from Jordan are using DSI from 31 other countries, accounting for 2,952 users. So these are just 4 countries, but I hope they give you a sense of the dynamic of science and scientific publication. DSI flows in both directions. Everyone provides, everyone uses. Is the system fair and equal and perfect? No, but it is a very dynamic bi-directional system. The system flows in both directions. Are you curious? Did you not see your country pop up here in those 4? I am very happy to provide a country-specific DSI briefing and to talk to you about your country's scientific output in the DSI databases and the users. And finally, if I got to ask for one wish here on the Happy Birthday Nagoya cake, I would ask you to please talk to your scientists. Learn how and why they use DSI, understand what they do, and how open access to DSI enables their research. I'd also like to thank colleagues all around the world that contributed both to the CBD study and as well to these more recent literature analyses. Thank you and happy birthday, Nagoya.
Thank you so much, Amber, for providing this overview on how DSI is being used and also by whom, no, in each different region. There are a couple of questions in the chat that we will try to ask you to during the Q&A session. So please stay with us. But again, I'm a lawyer, so I'm extremely limited. And all this DSI and the utilization of DSI is still like science fiction for me. So I would love to hear something more specific, more concrete that I could really almost touch. So I would love to hear an example of DSI in the case of pathogens and health emergencies. And for this question, I would like to introduce Dr. Christine Pratt, who is in charge of a working group on biobanking, access to resources, marketing, business intelligence at the European Consortium, the European Virus Archive, EVA. She is also the secretary of the French expert group on Nagoya Protocol EU registry for biobanks. So, Christine, can you share with us your experience on the use of DSI in relation to pathogens and health emergency situations?
Yes, hi. Hi, Alejandro. Hello, everyone. I think I will continue in French. Bonjour à tous, je m'appelle Christine et je suis basée à Marseille en France, donc pour moi c'est l'après-midi. Je vais vous partager ma présentation. Je pense que vous voyez tout ce qui se passe maintenant. Voilà, je vais vous parler en fait de ce qui se passe quand il y a une crise sanitaire causée par un pathogène nouveau. Donc, on est tous impliqués, enfin, on est tous affectés par cette pandémie due au SARS coronavirus 2 qui nous affecte tous d'une manière ou d'une autre. Et je vais vous parler en fait de ce qui se passe quand il y a une épidémie qui est causée par un virus émergent. Et il y a beaucoup de questions qui sont posées. Tout d'abord, comme c'est un virus inconnu, on ne sait pas quels sont tous les symptômes en fait associés à cette infection. On ne connaît pas forcément très bien dans les détails les mécanismes de transmission. On ne connaît pas non plus la dynamique de l'épidémie. Est-ce que l'épidémie avance à une vitesse phénoménale ou est-ce que c'est un phénomène restreint géographiquement dans le temps? Et on ne connaît pas la séquence non plus du pathogène. Et il y a plein d'autres questions, évidemment, comme nous avons pu tous le comprendre au cours de cette pandémie. En fait, il y a une urgence à rassembler autant d'informations que l'on peut sur ce pathogène pour pouvoir développer des contre-mesures pour lutter contre le pathogène de manière effective. Et la question principale, c'est comment rassembler cette information et de quoi nous avons besoin pour comprendre en fait cette nouvelle épidémie. Donc, par exemple, pour le point de vue du diagnostic. Donc, le diagnostic, c'est vraiment la première étape qui va nous permettre de comprendre quelle est la portée de l'épidémie. Il va falloir savoir si une personne qui présente des symptômes est effectivement affectée par ce nouveau virus ou pas. Pour faire ce diagnostic, vous avez maintenant tous entendu parler, je pense, des PCR, donc cette technique qui consiste à détecter le génome du pathogène dans un tissu humain. Enfin, ça peut être humain, vétérinaire, plante, etc. Mais bon, dans notre cas-là, c'est le virus humain. Et pour faire cette technique de PCR, comme dans presque toutes les expériences scientifiques, disons, nous avons besoin d'avoir un contrôle positif, c'est-à-dire d'être sûr que si nous détectons un résultat négatif, ce n'est pas parce que la technique n'a pas fonctionné, mais c'est parce qu'effectivement, le pathogène n'est pas présent. Et ce qui nous renseigne là-dessus, c'est notre contrôle positif qui va nous dire non, l'expérience a marché comme il faut le résultat est négatif, cela veut bien dire que la personne n'est pas infectée. C'est vraiment un point crucial. Et donc, nous avons besoin de ces contrôles positifs qui sont constitués de matériel génomique du nouveau pathogène. En recherche fondamentale, ce que j'entends par recherche fondamentale, c'est essayer de comprendre comment le virus rentre dans la cellule qui l'infecte. Comment est-ce qu'il va, dans le cas de la Covid-19, comment est-ce que le pathogène va enflammer le système immunitaire? Qu'est-ce qui va se passer? Pourquoi les gens développent une pneumopathie, etc., etc. Et donc, pour développer ces aspects un peu plus fondamentaux, on a besoin d'avoir accès à des souches de ce virus-là pour comprendre, à des modèles animaux peut-être, à des modèles in vitro. On a besoin d'avoir du matériel génétique, des protéines, et puis aussi, là je l'ai mentionné sur la diapositive, on a besoin d'avoir des formations. Au niveau de la recherche appliquée, donc ce que j'entends par recherche appliquée, ce sont le développement de vaccins, le développement de molécules antivirales, le développement d'un arsenal thérapeutique qui peut permettre de changer la donne pour le patient infecté. Et bien, dans le cas de cette recherche appliquée, il y a aussi besoin d'avoir des souches virales, mais pas seulement du virus en question, mais parfois il est nécessaire de comparer ce virus-là à d'autres virus qui présentent un tableau clinique un peu similaire ou qui se ressemblent. Enfin voilà, il y a besoin de tout ça. Et la problématique principale, en fait, au début d'une émergence avec un nouveau virus, c'est où trouver ces ressources et comment les obtenir rapidement. En fait, quand il y a un nouveau virus qui arrive, par définition, il n'est pas connu. Donc, c'est très difficile de se procurer du matériel parce qu'il n'y a pas d'entreprise, par exemple, ou, qui commercialise en fait des kits de diagnostic. Ils n'ont pas eu le temps de les développer, ils n'ont pas eu le temps d'avoir tous les approbations nécessaires pour la mise sur le marché, les vérifications, etc. Donc, par définition, il n'y a pas de marché qui existe. Et en fait, à ce moment-là, dans vraiment les débuts de l'émergence d'un nouveau virus, les biobanques sont vraiment la clé pour ça. Parce qu'une biobanque, en fait, c'est une collection. Une biobanque collectionne en fait ces ressources biologiques et les biobanques sont par définition préparées parce qu'elles ont des procédures en place, des normes qualité. Elles sont organisées, elles ont des procédures de logistique pour envoyer le matériel dans le monde et elles sont prêtes à partager leurs ressources. C'est pour ça qu'elles existent. Donc, je vais parler très brièvement du projet européen pour lequel je travaille. C'est The European Virus Archive, donc on l'appelle EVA. Et c'est un projet financé par l'Europe. C'est une infrastructure de recherche européenne qui est une biobanque à but non lucratif. Donc, c'est important de comprendre que nous collectionnons des virus et du matériel associé comme des génomes, des protéines, des anticorps, etc. Tout cela financé entièrement par des fonds publics. Donc, nous sommes financés par l'Europe pour distribuer nos produits dans le monde entier de manière gratuite. Là, je vais vous présenter dans les diapos suivantes 2 cas d'études que j'ai choisis. C'était l'émergence du virus Zika aux Amériques et la pandémie due au Covid-19. Donc, pour cette première étude de cas, c'est l'émergence du virus Zika aux Amériques en 2015. Alors, le virus Zika, vous n'êtes peut-être pas familier avec ce virus, mais il avait été premièrement découvert en fait en 1947 dans une forêt en Ouganda. Et il a ensuite émergé, ce qu'on dit émergé, c'est-à-dire qu'il a été détecté pour la première fois au Brésil, donc dans le nouveau monde, en mai 2015, et il a ensuite infecté plus d'1 million de personnes en 18 mois dans 87 pays d'Amérique du Sud. Donc, en fait, au début, on pensait que c'était un virus qui causait un syndrome de type dengue, avec une fièvre et quelques arthralgies, etc. Mais, donc, un syndrome qui ressemblait à la dengue, mais qui se finissait en quelques jours. Mais en fait, assez rapidement, on s'est rendu compte que en fait, les pathologies associées étaient beaucoup plus importantes que ce qu'on pensait au début et que le mode de transmission transmission n'était pas seulement au travers de la piqûre de moustiques infectés, mais il pouvait aussi être une transmission verticale de la femme enceinte à son fœtus, et aussi verticale avec une transmission sexuelle. Donc un virus qui s'est révélé être vraiment beaucoup plus compliqué que ce qu'on pensait au départ. Et en fait, ce qui s'est passé dans la biobanque EVA, c'est qu'il y a un voyageur qui est rentré à Marseille, il est rentré de Martinique avec cette fièvre, et le virus Zika a été isolé à partir de ce patient. Et nous avons aussi récupéré un patient qui est rentré de Polynésie française avec cette maladie, et nous avons réussi à isoler le virus. Nous avons aussi extrait le matériel génomique de ce virus, donc l'ARN, et nous avons rajouté ces produits, disons, à notre catalogue, à notre biobanque en ligne. Et l'OMS, en fait, a classé cette épidémie due au virus Zika comme une urgence de santé publique de portée internationale. Et après, à la suite de cette annonce, nous avons distribué de manière massive les produits EVA liés à ce virus dans le monde entier. Comme je vais montrer sur cette carte, vous voyez, chaque petit point représente en fait un envoi à un institut dans une ville donnée. Et vous voyez là sur le graphique ici sur le camembert, vous voyez que nous avons envoyé principalement des virus, mais aussi des réactifs de diagnostic et des produits dérivés, disons, pour aider à la recherche. Donc tous ces produits ont été distribués gratuitement. Et dans la deuxième étude de cas, ça concerne donc la pandémie Covid-19. Alors, j'ai représenté ici, sur l'échelle du temps, quelques événements marquants qui nous intéressent aujourd'hui. Donc, le 31 décembre 2019, la Chine a reporté un cluster de cas de pneumonie lié à un nouveau coronavirus. Et très rapidement après, ils ont partagé en fait la séquence génomique de ce coronavirus qui s'appelle le SARS-CoV-2. Et donc ce partage de séquences, c'est typiquement une information de séquence digitale, une DSI, une Digital Sequence Information. Et ce partage a complètement changé le cours de l'épidémie en fait. Parce que très rapidement, 4 jours plus tard, le 14 janvier, nos collègues en fait, qui font partie de la biobanque EVA de Charité à Berlin, c'est leur métier, c'est leur expertise. Ils ont développé très très rapidement, à partir uniquement de cette séquence génétique, les fameux contrôles positifs dont on a besoin en PCR et qui ont été recommandés par l'OMS. Et très très rapidement après, il y a eu détection. Grâce à la mise en place de ce diagnostic, il y a eu la détection des premiers cas dits autochtones en France, en Allemagne et en Espagne. Et les virus isolés à partir de ces patients ont aussi été rajoutés sur la biobanque EVA. Il y a eu, moins d'un mois après le partage de la séquence, il y a eu un design qui a changé là aussi le cours de l'épidémie. C'est le design d'un kit de diagnostic, designé par nous, parce que comme je l'ai dit précédemment, il n'y a pas de marché, pas de distribution par des entreprises à ce moment aussi proche du début de l'épidémie. Et donc, nous avons designé un kit de diagnostic lyophilisé pour un envoi à température ambiante. Nous avons aussi proposé des sessions de training pour réaliser ce diagnostic-là. Et je vous montre ici, en fait, pourquoi nous avons fait ça. C'est pour que les pays puissent se préparer, en fait, à l'arrivée de l'épidémie dans leur territoire. Donc là, j'ai montré sur cette figure la répartition, en fait, géographique des produits que nous avons envoyés à EVA, donc des produits diagnostiques que nous avons envoyés, de la semaine 3, c'est-à-dire c'était la troisième semaine de janvier 2020 jusqu'à la semaine 13, c'est-à-dire jusqu'à la fin mars 2020, donc très très rapidement au début de l'épidémie. Et vous voyez ici, juste si je montre en Europe, qu'il y a quand même les pays, très rapidement, grâce à notre biobanque, ont pu se préparer à réaliser le diagnostic sur leur territoire bien avant l'arrivée des premiers cas autochtones. Et on peut voir au cours du temps, avec les couleurs qui changent et qui deviennent de plus en plus foncées, qui représentent un nombre plus important, de plus en plus important de produits que nous avons envoyés, que l'Europe s'est peu à peu préparée jusqu'à la fin mars pour pouvoir réaliser ce diagnostic. Et en fait, ça s'est soldé par, en 9 mois, là, j'ai pris les données jusqu'à la fin octobre, nous avons distribué les produits de manière gratuite dans 114 pays. Donc, voilà, cette diapositive finale sert d'une discussion en fait ouverte pour dire que, comme nous l'avons vu dans le cas de la Covid-19, mais aussi dans le cas du virus Zika, le partage de séquences digitales, d'informations de séquences digitales, mais aussi le partage de ressources biologiques, ce partage peut changer le cours d'une épidémie mondiale. Et à l'opposé, ne pas le partager peut poser des menaces. La notion de One Health peut être vraiment impactée s'il n'y a pas ce partage. Et la distribution en fait, de ces produits de diagnostic qui ont été faits, c'est du benefit sharing, c'est du partage de bénéfices selon la définition du protocole de Nagoya. Et je voulais vous parler très, très brièvement, en fait, pour finir, du Pandemic Influenza Preparedness Framework, le PIP Framework, qui est un exemple d'une solution développée pour lutter très précisément contre les pandémies dues au virus influenza. Et donc, il s'agit de mettre sur le papier qu'il faut partager rapidement les virus influenza avec les centres collaborateurs OMS et partager les bénéfices qui en résultent, c'est-à-dire un accès et une distribution de produits diagnostiques et de traitements à ceux qui en ont besoin de manière avec un coût abordable et puis dans des délais très restreints. Bon, voilà, je voulais juste finir en remerciant le consortium EVA pour vous en parler un petit peu. Donc voilà, il s'agit de 27 partenaires qui sont localisés en Europe et aussi hors de l'Europe. Et nous avons des partenaires associés un petit peu partout sur le globe. Voilà, je vous remercie.
Thank you so much, Christine. Really useful to see, in particular in the current pandemic, how relevant biobanks are in these kind of situations, and how all these products are considered as benefit sharing. There have been a couple of questions, so for the Q&A, be ready, because we have a couple of questions for you. Some tricky questions, like if your institute is Nagoya Protocol compliant, but I will not anticipate. I will go to the last presentation, as we have been provoking researchers and also policymakers to continue this dialogue at the national level or regional level. Tauko, back to you. What are the possibilities for these policymakers and researchers to know more about these processes and even to be able to impact these processes and negotiations?
Thank you, Alejandro. We have heard that the issue of DSI has got a number of divergent views, and 3 of them is: one, whether genetic resources in the CBD cover DSI or not, or whether DSI should fall under the ABS regime, and whether open access to DSI can be regarded as a sufficient form of benefit sharing. The answers to those questions may vary depending on what your interests are. Are you government? Are you private sector? Are you researcher? Are you community, indigenous community, etc.? And so we have come up with a roadmap towards COP15 to try and find a way to provide those answers without necessarily at this point negotiating. And so there has been submissions of views about those issues. from February to June 2019. Thus, the first three circles indicate steps that are already passed. And then from those views, we had also peer-reviewed studies, 4 of them, and that took place between October and December 2019. And these then went to the ARTEC on DSI, which took place in March 2020. And the outcome of the ARTEC will go to be considered in the preparation for the post-2020 global priority framework. In between that is a substar or SPIA. The date is not yet determined, and that will then go to the open-ended working group on which will be on working group 3, which will be somewhere in 2021, most probably the first quarter, COVID permitting. And that the outcome of that will then go to COP15. And hopefully at that time, negotiations will have started. Now, from now onwards, December onwards, we have prepared information sharing webinars on DSI. The first one is taking place on the 1st of December, 2020. And it's tailored to create understanding on the key issues around DSI as a concept and as a potential key to what is ahead of us. And it is to bring us all on the same page regarding what is it really that we're talking about. And then the next webinar will be on the 9th of December, which will be DSI under the CBD. The first one will be in partnership with the ABS Capacity Initiative, and the second one will be by the Secretariat itself. And here we will look at the ARTEC and all other information available at this stage. And the third webinar will take place somewhere, most probably in the first quarter of 2021. And that one will look, now that we have looked at what is DSA, now that we have looked at what are the experts saying, what is the emerging policy options for ABS and DSI that are coming forth, and this will then be tabled in that webinar somewhere in the first quarter of 2021. And as I said, it's not to negotiate, but simply to create momentum and help us to understand the key issues to facilitate later on the ease of flow with negotiations. Thank you. That was all.
Thank you so much. Teokondo, just to indicate the possible entry points of incoming events related to these topics, some information sharing webinars, and other more negotiation-based meetings that can be followed, but only by certain participants, okay? Great, so we have some minutes for Q&A, questions and answers. I think your presentation, Amber, raised different questions. I think you have covered some of them very actively, answering directly via the Q&A section. But if you could make an open clarification regarding the source, I think that was a key point raised, and I think that could be useful to understand, to better understand for everyone. If this DSI that you were making reference to, we have the reference of the source, the country of origin that you were making reference. So please, if you can clarify on that, could be useful.
Absolutely. Thanks, Alejandro. It's always a challenge in a 10-minute talk to not bore people with technical details. So I've tried to be very thorough in the chat. The data I presented on the world maps of where DSI comes from is the country of origin. It is not where the genetic resource was sequenced. So it is true that China and US lead the way. That's just what it is. Actually, interestingly, the data in the database is not very good on where the genetic resource was sequenced. That has to do with inconsistencies in how institutes are listed there. There's also a secondary question, this is a very technical question, about the sequences in the database that have no country information, where the scientist did not fill in the country field when they submitted it to the database. This is also a very important question, and we spent a number of pages in the study, and the link is in the chat. But the simple part is there are 43% of sequences in the database should have country of information, but do not. So there is a lot of room for improvement. But you could ask me, does that mean my maps are wrong? That there's massive amounts of data from Brazil, for example, that would make the map look very different if those countries had filled in the country. And that's not true. So what students and I here at the Institute did was look at over 100 publications where there was no country information, but we went back to the original publication. And we then looked at the ratios of the country where the information was missing. And we saw the same ratios, 25% US, 25% China, and then 1% Ecuador, whatever. I'm making the numbers up. And that tells us that what the country information, where it's missing, is not likely to be very different than what the world map shows, but it is an extrapolation, and we're doing the best we can with messy global data. So I hope that makes sense. Go read the study. The page numbers are in there.
Fantastic, Amber. I think that's very clear. Thank you for your clarification, although you mentioned, I think during your first intervention, some of those points. Of course, we have some comments regarding whether national assistance should not focus at all on non-commercial research. I don't know if some colleagues want to answer that from Madagascar or Jordan. We have also other questions regarding virus. Whether this issue of DSI is being addressed also at the WIPO Intergovernmental Committee on Genetic Resources, Traditional Knowledge and Intellectual Property. I don't think so, but other colleagues may clarify that point too. And there was a question to you, Christine, although I think it was answered by Amber, whether EVA is Nagoya compliant or not.
Hi, thanks. Yes, I mean, Amber has already said all there is to say with a link on our website. So it's been years now that we are in the process of implementing that, and everything is detailed on this webpage that she has linked. I can just comment on another question that I've been seeing about a very interesting question, actually. Can anyone claim sovereignty over a virus that is constantly mutating? Is the COVID South strain isolated in Spain or France, the same one that originated in Wuhan? So it's a very interesting question, and it's almost like a full research question, I would say. But to answer shortly, at the moment, the Nagoya Protocol says that a virus that has been isolated in a certain country belongs to this country. But exception is made for when a traveler returns from a country with the virus, and the virus is then isolated in another country, because at this time it is considered to be an unintentional bringing back of the virus, unintentional import. So in that case, it belongs to the country where the virus was isolated. So to answer precisely this question, the SARS coronavirus has not mutated that much from the original China one. But the fact that it was isolated in Spain makes it a Spanish virus, or the fact that it was isolated in France makes it a French virus now. So that's it.
That's a very good point. And now that we are talking about local transmission or kind of imported transmission, it could be following the same rationale, no? That you just indicated.
Exactly.
Perfect. So let me check if we can address any other question or comment. There was some questions about funding. I think Mary from the European Commission, you wanted to make another point. So please go ahead.
Thank you, Alejandro. Yes, I'm sorry. I don't know if being a panelist, I'm not allowed probably to put Q&A question in the QA and A sessions, or at least I didn't manage to do that. So that's why I flagged this into the, okay, I'll try to start my video as well. Yes. Into the chat. Yeah, thanks. I had a question for the CBD Secretariat and also a comment to share with the participant. For the CBD Secretariat, I would like to, it's super interesting to learn that we will have these possibilities to listen to probably also scientists or other stakeholders that are interested by the discussion on DSI to inform our discussion as policymakers, because like someone said before, we all need to understand with what we are dealing with and what the potential pros and cons on every possible solutions that we might come up to address benefit sharing from DSI can bring. But with regard the last event, hi Tauko, could you please provide further clarification on how this will be organized? Because for the first one and the second one, this was quite clear, but on the third one, I didn't really get it. So if you can provide further information on this would be super useful. Then I've seen many comments on why we do not tackle only commercial research, or how we can address the fact that DSI is also utilized for commercial purposes, and then the private sectors also contribute to the benefit sharing. And this made me think that probably now I'm thinking about the ABS we all need. Probably we will need to look for something different in the future, because if we have this kind of questions, well, in terms of regulation, we can always try to find more simple processes, more simple procedures, for instance, for facilitated access in the case of non-commercial research, standard, this kind of things. But then I think about the benefit sharing parts, and I wonder whether we should all listen to these claims that are coming from the stakeholders and from those who really use genetic resources and DSI tackle this in the future. So this is just a consideration for my colleagues to further develop future thoughts on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Taukondo, you want to come in on this?
Yep. I think we must not lose focus that this is, of course, happening also within the frame of the post-2020 global policy framework. So we have to look at the link between ABS, DSI, and the post-2020 policy framework and provide answers to what the COP has asked us to do. So, and if you look at the current webinars that have taken place, there was one by Amber. I think there were 5 options and scenarios that were provided that could provide a potential way out in the way how we deal with DSI. And we are expecting that there may be more webinars coming out from various partners besides us here that will also provide options and scenarios as to how we address the different interests and positions of the various stakeholders. So we are hoping, and that's why we kind of pushing the policy options for ABS and ADSI a bit forward to give enough room for more discussions to take place. It's not necessarily negotiations, but and then out of those discussions that are being done, to share information, to understand what is the issue and why is it an issue, and what can we do about it. So that then in the end, in that webinar, we will draw upon everything that has been said, proposed as option scenarios, concretize them and put them forward and have a discussion around that without necessarily negotiating. And hopefully that process of negotiating can then take place from the working group, as is outlined in the process that we have given forth here to be completed and hopefully at the COP. Not doing so may mean that we come to the COP without having a clear understanding of what this thing is and what we can do about it, and we may not have enough time to come up with a very well thought through process and product. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Taukondo. There is a question in the Q&A section that refers to Mary, to the European Commission, but I think it's actually applicable to all of the colleagues that are working as competent national authorities or national focal points. And the question is, are there initiatives or moves to raise awareness within other European institutions likely to partially overlap with ABS Nagoya framework? And in the previous session, we were making reference to this, no? To the need. ABS is very horizontal. Health, for instance, as it was expressed in the last presentation made by Christine, is obvious that we need to make an extra effort, no, to move into the other areas like the health sector. So the question is whether the EC is making a move to other departments. My question would be whether the European Commission, but other colleagues, other governments are organizing dialogues at the national level with researchers or with other departments in order to prepare their positions in the negotiation of this topic.
Yes, thank you. I will not switch my video on because I saw a comment that apparently was not very good my audio before, so I will do it like this. I hope you can hear me well now. Okay, thanks. I skipped that question. Actually, I realized. Yeah, in the EU, I mean, at the level of the Commission, we have constant dialogues with our other departments dealing, for instance, with the FAO Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources, but also with our colleagues dealing with issues related to WHO. And we try to constantly exchange information, discuss on similar issues, to find also additional inputs on how to solve critical aspects or issues that are common to other sectors, like, for instance, plant genetic resources, but also now we are discussing a lot with the colleagues that are involved with the implementation of the PRIT framework or other discussions under the WHO, whether maybe more instruments to ensure expedited access in case of emergencies would be needed. So in this sense, we don't have like an institutional forum for this, but in terms of interinstitutional cooperation, yes, we're doing our best efforts to ensure this. We have, as for the consultation of stakeholders, we have an institutional sitting for this, which is what we call the consultation forum, established under the UABS regulation, and is a forum that gathers together civil representatives of different sectors of both private and public sectors, so also researchers, but also companies, for instance. And this is a forum where we discuss ABS issues. And we, for DSI, for instance, instead, we have started to consult, to have consultations with stakeholders, in particular with the scientific sector. I hope I answered the question.
Thank you, Mary. Yes, definitely. Lolona from Madagascar, are you planning or are you contacting different departments or organizing meetings with researchers, for instance?
Excuse me for the interruption,
Oui,
Lolona.
merci Alejandro pour cette réponse. J'aurais une réponse assez similaire.
Lolona,
oui.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Would you please, to start before starting your intervention, would you please switch the channel from French to English to the original audio? Thank you.
Okay. Is it okay now? Is it okay now?
You can continue. Thank you.
OK. La réponse que je vais donner sera très semblable à ce que Thierry a donné. L'autorité nationale compétente et le point focal pour l'ABS, pour la part Madagascar, sont au niveau de l'environnement. Et l'aspect intersectoriel de l'APA, on a des processus de consultation donc des différents secteurs, l'agriculture, l'élevage, la pêche, également donc les ressources génétiques, le ministère de la Recherche scientifique, bien entendu, ministère du Commerce et de l'Industrie, ministère de la Santé publique et ministère de la Culture, parce qu'on considère à Madagascar les connaissances traditionnelles font partie de patrimoine culturel. Donc, il y a ces différentes consultations auprès des autres ministères, mais il y a également donc, consultations et puis discussions auprès du secteur privé, comme par exemple récemment donc avec le groupement qui produit des huiles essentielles et de plantes à Madagascar et qui font l'exportation. Comme il y aura donc une évolution dans leur activité, il y a utilisation en recherche et développement de leurs produits exportés, il y a lieu de considérer l'APA. Et il y a également les communautés locales qui sont considérées et qui sont consultées, pour lesquelles on fait vraiment de renforcer la capacité parce que ce n'est pas très évident pour eux de comprendre le mécanisme APA, comme ils étaient habitués à uniquement fournir des matières premières, essentiellement donc des feuilles de plantes. Maintenant, on leur a sensibilisé pour voir au-delà de ça, pour bénéficier des partages des avantages de l'utilisation des ressources génétiques à Madagascar. Donc, c'est un processus continu. Hein. On a commencé, comme je l'ai dit, depuis 2015, après la ratification du protocole de Nagoya, et ça continue. Et étant donné que le pays est également assez grand, donc on a vraiment du travail, on a du grand chantier à faire pour ces contacts et discussions avec les parties. Merci.
Thank you so much, Lolona, for that feedback and encouraging answer as well. To conclude, I would like to ask Leticia, I think there are some colleagues, some participants are taking advantage of you as panelists, although you did not make a presentation on South Africa, but I think South Africa, no doubt, is a reference in the implementation of ABS in the region, in the continent. So do you have any reflection regarding this? The participant is asking what do you think about adding more complexity to access of digital sequence information from South Africa at the risk of South African researchers potentially losing access to global data? I don't know if you want to share your views on this very quickly, Leticia.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. I was going through, all the questions with a lot of interest in all of them. But I will start with the one that you just mentioned now regarding how do I feel after seeing the statistics as shared by Amber. So I think for me, as I'm working in the space of ABS, I know that South Africa comes, is working in this space not only as a provider, but also as a user. I think that is something that we are fully aware of. And in terms of our national legislation, we do regulate our national researchers. But I think the question about adding complexity, I think the term complexity is the one that needs to be entertained here, because what we're calling for under the DSI discussion is not necessarily looking at the access process of those DSI, but I think the focus is more on how best can we ensure that there's sharing of benefits from the use of such DSI. So I think if there can be an acknowledgement that there is a need to come up with benefit sharing solution from the use of DSI. The issue of complexity is something that requires the minds of all stakeholders involved, to think together and come up with a more efficient and simplified process that will not add more burden to the researchers. I know researchers come in different categories, and our legislation, it does touches on Article 8 of the Nagoya Protocol, where the requirements are not that stringent for basic research just to generate scientific information or knowledge. But in any case, we are available to engage, and we are also looking forward to more support and input on how best we can deal with this issue of DSI and the researchers. If there's complexity, we are always open to engage with our researchers. I think our law is even open for review. So once it's published, you are welcome to contribute in terms of providing input. So I'm not sure if I should also go to others. I saw one about the rhino, how is DSI?
Yes, I saw that.
Yeah, so I think in your introduction, Alejandro, on the DSI topic, you did touch on the importance of it in relation to conservation and sustainable use of our biological diversity. And in the case of the rhino species, I think it has really played a very crucial role in terms of identifying and mitigating the risk to these threatened species. And it's used in order to track the illegal trade, and also, identifying the geographical origin of the product, and also assist in terms of the planning for conservation management. Thank you.
Fantastic. And I get from your answer also that you are going to promote, you are already promoting, but you are going to continue to promote this dialogue with researchers and with all the departments within South Africa. And although you were not presenting on South Africa this week, this is a perfect opportunity to indicate that next week we will have this dialogue with private sector, and you will be presenting the case of South Africa, and we will have hopefully also the experience of the private sector, in this case from Body Shop, if I'm not wrong, indicating what was the experience of this company in South Africa. We have been for 3 hours already, so thank you so much to, first of all, to the interpreters, to the panelists for bearing with us. This was the second session in a row today for most of them, and also to the team, the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity, and also to the UNDP-GEF Global ABS Project team for making possible this session. Please join us for the incoming sessions. Next Wednesday, we will have, as I just indicated, this dialogue between governments, national competent authorities, and private sector. The following week, on the 18th of November, we will have a similar dialogue between national competent authorities and indigenous peoples and local communities. And the final session will be on the 25th. We will gather all the exchanges that we have had during all these sessions, and we will also bring the views of capacity building organizations, institutions that are working on ABS, and donors to discuss what is the plans for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework negotiations. Again, thank you so much for this fantastic section. We just hope that this is the beginning of a dialogue that will continue at the national and regional levels. Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you.